Jags GM Trent Baalke says he doesn't like looking in the past. Well, we do. Did they miss an opportunity on the offensive line for the second consecutive offseason? Let's find out today on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars, where you can find us everywhere you get audio and video podcast. Check that platform, man. Make sure you don't miss an episode of Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started, which is exactly what we're going to do right here, right now, talking about whether or not the Jaguars have missed opportunities. But I'm going to tell you where we're going to end up. We're going to end up talking about the fact that they say there's no drop-off between the starters and the backups. Is that good or bad? Because people are making more money to be a starter than they are to be a backup. So what is all the extra money for? We'll get to that. Doug Peterson said this today. When asked about how they're going to trim the roster, the competition at DB and O-line is going to be really, really interesting, right? Something like that, he said. I agree with him, but I'm going to tell you why there's a difference between the type of interesting they're going to be. And speaking of the offensive line, here's where we're going to start. Missed opportunities on the offensive line. Today, during the press conference, Doug Peterson said that the offensive line, he thought they did a good job in the one-on-ones against Tampa. That Vita Vea is a huge man. Tampa defensive tackle. Vita Vea is a huge man. We all get that. So head coach Doug Peterson says he thought they did a nice job. Nobody else did, but that's okay, I guess, because like I said, they have the eye in the sky over there in Jacksonville. They have the tape. We don't. They know whether or not in these circumstances what they weren't scheming for. So they have the right to give us that opinion. Do you believe it? I don't. But that's cool because I'm not the head coach. The proof is going to be in the pudding when they get on the field. Let me tell you where this all comes from. The last few practices, including the joint practices with Tampa the last 2 days, as well as the preseason, at least when the starters were in the game. And then the week prior to that, when the team was just going against itself in practice, one of the things that we all said was the offensive line looks like they're not doing well. That was a fact. You can look back at the podcast or listen back to the podcast and you can absolutely hear that. But to give the benefit of the doubt, which one of the listeners told me yesterday, you shouldn't give them the benefit of the doubt. They've been bad. No, we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt because they said that one of the things about this team was that last year they only had one game with the 5 guys that they wanted to be the starters. And this goes into that drop-off thing later on that we're going to talk about. Like, I understand it's next man up. I understand that all this preseason, what they have been doing is letting reserves mix in with starters on the defense as well as the offense. I get all of that because they want to build up the bottom of the roster because the perception was that last year when they asked certain guys to step up, they weren't able to step up because they had never been put in those positions. All right. So let's get back to this, to missed opportunities. The Jaguars said last year that they were going to be a draft and develop team, and they did nothing in free agency, pretty much. They came out this year and did a whole bunch in free agency, none in the offensive line department, and said that everything that they didn't do was primarily because they liked the guys that they had. They retained some people, re-signed some people, and said that they just got to get healthy. The guys weren't healthy last year. So that's what we're rolling with, right? That's the fact that's in evidence that they said that we're going to roll with. So we gave them the benefit of the doubt. So far, it doesn't look like that. Now, I'm talking about it doesn't look like that from the eyes of me, a person in the media, and a whole bunch of fans, and a whole bunch of other guys in the media. Doug Peterson says, oh, it looks like everything's okay. Looks like we guys did a nice job, and Ezra Cleveland, the guard, he's not hurt, and He's just a little bit banged up and he's a little sore, but he'll be all right. And Cooper Hodges, the guy who missed all of last season, everybody wants him to start at one of the guard spots that are held by Ezra Cleveland, as well as Brandon Sheriff. And they're making pretty good money. But folks want to see Cooper Hodges. Doug said, yeah, he's a big man. He's good. He's pretty good. We're going to see what he can do because Ezra's going to be out. The question is for me, and I hope I didn't lose you because I'm trying to tie all this together. The question is for me, did they do enough? The answer is no. They did not. Trevor Lawrence is more important to this team than anybody else. Trevor Lawrence needs to be upright. Trevor Lawrence doesn't need to be running for his life because his success is directly reflected by the people protecting him first and then who he's throwing the ball to second. The people that are throwing the ball, who he's throwing the ball to, are fine. They've looked good in the preseason. People have a good idea of who they are and what they're capable of. The people that have to protect them have not looked that good. By the way, being healthy is a skill. Your best ability is your availability. If you, I don't care how good you are, if you're not healthy, that's a problem. And they seem to be unhealthy a whole bunch on the offensive line. And it's not just the starters, it's even some of the backups. They seem to be unhealthy a whole bunch. There was some mention about the strength conditioning program in the offseason, but there was never really a finger pointed. But they said those guys need to just, everybody needs to kind of get on the same page. That's sort of what it was. GM Trent Baalke says he doesn't look back. There's no reason to look back. But we look back because this is how we got here. Have the Jaguars drafted offensive linemen? Yes. Have they tried to fortify the offensive line? Sure, they have. Have they done it good enough? I don't believe so. Because I am of the belief that when you have an elite quarterback, you have to be very, very good at the very minimum on the offensive line. It maximizes his ability to lift the team and be great. So while all this conversation is going around about how good Trevor Lawrence is or who is he and what is he, and he's not the prince that was promised and he doesn't look good, he's not a franchise guy, he ain't generational, all of those things that were said about Trevor Lawrence, and only people locally here have mentioned the offensive line. Fans and media have mentioned the offensive line for the last few years. You barely hear a peep from national guys when talking about the offensive line and whether or not that has contributed to Trevor Lawrence's play, that a lot of them don't seem to think that it was very good. I'm going to go through some of the blunders. I'm going to go through some of the mistakes. And I'm just going to go through some of the, let's just call it, it's not intent. They don't want Trevor to get killed, but it is their judgment. I'm going to go through the judgment aspect of this. And I'm going to tell you why. This is one time I thought they should have hedged their bets because Trevor Lawrence needs protection. Consider them bodyguards. Would you let your asset go into a danger zone without bodyguards? Would you not have adequate security if Trevor Lawrence is going somewhere where danger is around? Well, danger exists on a football field every single Sunday. We're going to go through real quick, and we're going to tell you exactly why I think they messed up. And I'm not going to wait until the middle of the year like I did last year to say we got a problem. It was week 12, right after the 49ers game. I said we got a problem. I'm not going to wait. I'm going to tell you now. I told you yesterday, if you did not hear the podcast, this is a little bit of a synopsis of what I said yesterday. Let's not act like they ain't won 9 games in 2 years. So a bad offensive line generally makes a team look terrible. The thing is, they won 9 games, but in all of the games they lost, they looked terrible. And they looked terrible doing it the same way with the quarterback running for his life. So that's a problem for me. I'm going to go through it. I'm going to tell you some of the missteps and why this thing looks the way that it looks. And the optimism has just kind of flown out of the window. They can win a couple of more games. They can win 11 games. They can do it. But we have always talked about championships. We have always talked about contending for championships. So from that perspective, we're going to get into segment 2 where we're going to talk about the offensive line. And then we're going to go into the fact that Doug Peterson today said that there's competition to DB and offensive line. But I'm going to tell you why those competitions Even though they sound the same, they look totally different. We'll get into that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is brought to you and sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is the place where you can go and get therapy when you need it. That is exactly right. Life sometimes deals you a hand that you can't play it by yourself to get yourself back on your square. You just can't. Sometimes you just need additional help from another source. And for me, that source was BetterHelp. Used BetterHelp on multiple occasions when I was having personal difficulty, and it absolutely helped. I'm telling you, man, even when you know what makes you happy and what fulfills you, sometimes it's just hard to get to it. BetterHelp can help you do that. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, please give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip a day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to stay today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON. Thank you for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars, segment 2 about to start. Remember, it is your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. Shout out to the everydayers who join us every single day. We are talking about the offensive line. Unfortunately, for the second day in a row, and unfortunately for like the fourth year in a row, we're giving this a lot of attention. I will lead this off by saying I could be absolutely wrong, that the eye in the sky and all of the tape that the coaches are privy to that we are not can tell you that I may be overreacting. What I'm not overreacting to is the fact that we watched the preseason game and we couldn't move the ball, and the best defensive lineman for the Kansas City Chiefs, who was the opponent last Saturday night, Chris Jones, Hall of Famer, GOAT conversation type Hall of Famer, he didn't play. No, it was like Fabian Lovett, rookie out of Florida State, and all of these other cats that were out there running around. And they absolutely stuffed the Jaguars starters when they were in the game. There were 2 players missing, but like I said, they were also, the Kansas City Chiefs were also missing Chris Jones. So we can't let that get away. And I'm standing there with a dude like Leon Searcy in practice, and he tells me, I just want them to get a stalemate, man. I want them to keep it even, and they're not doing that enough. Well, I take an NFL guy, a very good player, guy that played at an all-pro level. I take his word very seriously. So I go back and I take a look. And not only that, right after that, we watched practice in 11-on-11, and Trevor Lawrence was running for his life again. And we know Vita Vea is big. I said it yesterday on social media. You don't realize how big he is. There are a lot of big, strong guys in the NFL, man, and they may not be that good, but still, it does not matter. You are going to have to meet force with force. The Jacksonville Jaguars added Mitch Morse, 32-year-old center, in the offseason. And the myopic view of the fans thought that all they had to do was replace Luke Fortner, who was the center the last 2 years, who seemed like they were playing Twister because he always was on the ground in some weird position and on his butt, and that's just not where an offensive lineman is supposed to be. When you watch Jaguars tape and you see linemen pulling, well, they're supposed to be able to pull. They ain't supposed to run into their own dude who's sitting on the ground. Too many times things just got destroyed from the middle of the line, from guard to guard, guard, center, guard last year. And the Jaguar fan base was hoping that it was over. Missed opportunity. Last year, when they could have got somebody in the draft, they didn't. They took Anton Harrison in the first round. Great pick. You should have doubled back. Last year's draft was full of interior players that are now playing around the league. If you don't believe me, go look at last year's draft at drafthistory.com. Pick a position and look at those dudes that were picked in the first 4 rounds. This year, another one. We all follow the Senior Bowl and Jim Nagy and that crew. They talk about it all the time. There's going to be 10, 12 dudes here that's going to start for somebody's team in the National Football League. Nothing against Cooper Hodges, who missed all of last season because the Jaguars did draft him last season. Nothing against anybody. When you have an asset like Trevor Lawrence that you absolutely need to protect, there is no reason that you should not spare any expense. The way that they've done with the defensive line and the wide receiver position this year, the way for years they did with the defensive backs, Go look at how many guys they've signed in the defensive backfield the last 4 seasons that they've either drafted or paid in free agency. It's a tremendous amount of people that have rotated in and out. It seems like the Jaguars have always tried to find gems on the offensive line. I don't know if somebody told them that they're real good at doing that, but it just seems like that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to find gems that now, mark my word now, they have used, let's go back, Anton Harrison, first round pick. They drafted Walker Little 2 years ago in the second round. I got a feeling Walker Little's going to leave after 4 years, and he's not even going to ever be a full-time star. He's not going to get a second contract here. I don't think so. I don't know unless he agrees that he's not even a swing tackle. He's like the 7th or the 8th guy. They took Luke Fortner, who we mentioned earlier. They took him in the 3rd round. This particular organization or this particular leadership did not draft Cam Robinson. He was already here, but he was a 2nd-round pick. And this organization also didn't take Juwan Taylor because Juwan Taylor was a 2nd-round pick. But Trent Baalke wasn't a GM yet, so I think he might have been an assistant GM. But Juwan Taylor was here for 4 years, and now he's playing right tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs, making a lot of money. If there's a lot of competition at offensive line, you know what it is? It's like everybody's the same. If everybody, there's no drop-off. If there's a lot of competition, it's going to be really, really hard. That means everybody's like a 5.5 out of 10. With the exception of Anton Harrison and probably Cam Robinson. And I give Mitch Morse a little bit of love because he ain't been here long enough to get criticized in real game action. And he did okay for Buffalo, so he must be okay. The bottom line is, man, is Trevor's too important for you to be playing nilly-willy with the offensive line, especially when other teams that you got to play against, they will go out and draft 1 or 2 guys and sign another dude in free agency. And if he ain't working, they'll get another one and another one and another one. There's a reason why certain teams always seem to have capable offensive linemen. And the Jaguars seem like they don't. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this isn't a problem for this team. But everything that they talk about and everything that they brag about is all about the defense being better. It's about the skill position players being better. And that's the only way I could justify not making wholesale changes on the offensive line this year. It was either going to be too expensive. You can't do everything in one off season, which leads me to look back and say, you can't make up for lost time last year. Because I think that's what it is. They tried to make up for lost time in the offseason by when they didn't do a thing a year ago in the offseason in free agency. And then this year, they went crazy in free agency. And even in a year that when they went crazy in free agency, they didn't go crazy on their own offensive line because I think they believe too much in their ability to draft and develop guys that nobody else wants early. And they can find these gems. And that Coach Phil Rauscher is going to work some sort of magic, and this offensive line is going to play way better than you expect. And that is just not the case. What does this have to do with training camp today? Absolutely nothing, because training camp today was done in shorts. And they look really, really good again in shorts. That means 7-on-7, no contact, nobody rushing. Can they look good in full pads? That's how they play the games. And I'm starting to wonder if they're good enough on the offensive line to really make a threat to all of these top teams in the AFC. There is no competition for those 10 spots that makes you believe that those guys are very good, like the one on the defense. The defensive backs, yeah, they're going to cut some good football players because there is competition on that side of the ball. And that's a testament to Trent Baalke. I'm not saying kudos to you. Kudos to the Jacksonville Jaguars, because that was a big question coming into this offseason, because in 2025, before all of these re-signings, before all that, there was going to be one guy under contract in 2025 in that secondary. That has changed. They have people. They drafted folks. They added folks. They held nothing back. That's the attitude, in my opinion, that they should have for the offensive line, because those guys are the bodyguards and the protectors for the biggest thing that has come here, the best player on the team, and it's Trevor Lawrence. It's the most important thing. When did drafting and developing really, really become their mantra? Was it last year? Was it this year? It's a little bit confusing. I'll tell you why it's so important, and I'll tell you who said it last year, who said it this year, what happened in between, and what we really have to do moving forward if that position is going to be appropriately addressed so that Trevor Lawrence doesn't run for his life for his entire career. We'll talk about that and more in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. That's right, man. FanDuel, I know for a fact it is the truth because I'm a big FanDuel guy, right? And I love sports. And I'm so glad football is coming back. We still got a few weeks, and the sports aren't sporting like I like them to. Baseball is cool, but I like when they're all kind of intertwined and running together. But FanDuel this summer says, don't worry about it. Look, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus, and they're doing it daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. Read all of that literature about those bullpens because I'm going to tell you, it'll get tricky when that starter goes out of the game in baseball, all right? FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars with your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. Please make your second listen. The Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I know y'all got all these drafts coming up. Get daily insight to the best fantasy football draft strategies so you can win your league this season, like I did 2 years ago. The Fantasy Football Podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I know y'all fantasizing about a Super Bowl and fantasizing about all that in Jacksonville. I do think you can win without a great offensive line. I think you can possibly win without a good offensive line. I don't think it's possible at all for you to win a game with a subpar offensive line, especially if the other team has a great offensive line and they're a team that can score points. You can't keep up with them because you're going to make too many mistakes. They have said that they're a draft and develop team. It started in 2023 in the offseason. Doug Peterson said they believe they're a draft and develop football team. I totally agree with the premise and the idea of being a draft and develop football team. I've said it over and over again through the years. The analogy here that I always give on Locked On Jaguars is that I liken it to building a house. No matter how long it takes, you always got to be building it, and you start to see the elevation. When there's a slab, and then from a slab, you see the plumbing, then you see the framing, and then you see some drywall, and then you start seeing windows and a roof, and that thing is getting done, right? Well, the Jaguars kept tearing down their frame every 3 or 4 years because they were changing coaches, changing schemes. It kept going backwards, and then they kept ending up with the foundation. And a promise and a hope that they were going to rebuild. Right? So that's where the thinking is. The thinking is they finally got some elevation when they made the playoffs after 2022. And that's when they made what I believe is a big mistake and said, we're a draft to develop team. That doesn't mean you're not going to do anything in free agency or you thought you'd arrive. The Jaguars really tried to run it back with the same team that they had. That was a mistake that they made in 2018 when they did the exact same thing after making it to the AFC Championship against New England in 2017. This is not the same administration, coaches, none of that. But the fans are the same people. And you saw it once and you didn't really like it. But guess what? We gave them the benefit of the doubt. Well, they ended up 9-8 again, but it's not the same 9-8. It looked different because they won a bunch of games early last year and then lost everything late and then lost to the lowly Tennessee Titans, who had no stake in the game other than just to beat the Jaguars and keep them out of the playoffs. Then the year before, they lost a bunch of games early and then won and got hot going into the playoffs. The problem is they believed that hot that they got was going to keep going and keep carrying over. And a lot of times it does with a lot of teams. It just didn't work that way with the Jags. So they said that they were a draft and develop team after that. Cool. Everybody says, let's see how it works out. Didn't work out. Guess what they did this year? They signed a whole bunch of free agents. They gave big money to Eric Armstead. They gave big money to Darnell Savage. They re-signed Brandon Sheriff. They re-signed Ezra Cleveland. They gave big time money to Gabe Davis. They re-signed Foye Oluokun. They re-signed Tyson Campbell. And then they gave $275 million to Trevor Lawrence in an extension. I'm not saying I disagree with any of that stuff. And I know you can't do everything in one off season. What I'm disagreeing is they shouldn't have come into this offseason with this many things to do because they didn't do anything last year. They didn't do it last year, and then they said, we're going to be a draft and a develop team. Then in this free agency, they go out and go absolutely crazy. And then after they go crazy in free agency, Shad Khan, that's the second one that said it, goes, we can't continue to be a draft and develop. We can't keep depending on free agents. We got to be a draft and development team. Thank you for saying it after you spend money on free agency. But they said it the year before they spent money on free agency. So the question is can you make up for what you didn't do a year ago? I don't think you can. And even if they had done it, I don't think they haven't addressed the offensive line appropriately. They took Javon Foster this year too in the 4th round. I don't think it's just a matter of them not doing it. I honestly believe it's a misevaluation of the guys that they have and a misevaluation of some of the guys that they went and got, with the exception of Anton Harrison. The thing is they should have took more swings at it. The offensive line classes the last 2 years have been loaded. They should have been, just like I said, the DB and the O-line competition that they talk about, they may be in the same situation, but they don't look the same. The same way that they exhausted resources to get defensive backs is the same way they should have exhausted some resources to get some offensive linemen. The problem is they were trying to do everything in one off season because they didn't do it the year before. And now here we are. Can they win 2 or 3 more games than they did last year? Yes. And be an 11 and 12 win team? Yeah, because they've improved everything else. Will it be enough if this offensive line improves and gets better and hits some chemistry and all of these other things start going well? Sure. They can figure it out and they can make something happen. My only issue is, why take a chance? I think, I don't know where I got that from. I got that, I think, from Goodfellas. Why take a chance? Maybe it was Casino. Why take a chance? Why take a chance when Trevor Lawrence is your quarterback? Why take a chance when his extension is going to kick in and it's going to limit the things that you can do? Why take a chance when you can load up and not be in a situation where a season where we're all supposed to be enthusiastic, and in a season where y'all have actually changed your attitude and changed your strategy, now is it too late? I don't think it's necessarily too late, but it's going to be more and more difficult if they can't block people. And oh, by the way, Mitch Morse is 32 years old. Brandon Sheriff is older. So at some point in the future, the Jaguars will probably have an opportunity to get 2 or 3 different offensive linemen, but that doesn't do anything for us now. Just like talking about the past, if you're Trent Baalke, doesn't do anything for him then. This is what we are dealing with this year. This year, the boys going to have to figure out a way to win despite the fact, or in spite of, which one of those things works, whichever phrase works. They're going to have to do it without the benefit of having a line that can just dominate people whenever they want. It makes it more difficult. It doesn't make it impossible. And that's why you can still be optimistic and hopeful that at some point they'll get it together and things will work out. Because, hey, man, they won a playoff game 2 years ago, and the offensive line was worse than it is now. It's just that they've had 2 years to improve it, and the improvements have been very, very minimal. And I told y'all it was more than just the center. I love Jaguar fans, but, man, they'll laser in on one thing and think that one thing, whether it was the pass rush 2 years ago, whether it's Press Taylor last year, and whether it was just getting Jackson Powers Johnson, who everybody wanted before the draft. And I told you, it ain't just one thing. It's more than that. It's a team effort. It's a team effort between you and I, too. And that's why I appreciate you joining Locked On Jaguars and making it your first listen. Now go listen to Locked On Fantasy Football's podcast. That's the podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the descriptions, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Preview of the game tomorrow. But tell you who's going to play, who probably won't, and how you can watch it and still enjoy it because of the said competition that these coaches are talking about. Until then, you guys make sure you take care of each other. We'll see you tomorrow, every dayers, and everyone else. If you're new to the Locked On Jaguars podcast, thank you for joining us. And please, hopefully you enjoyed it and you stick around. We'll see you. Y'all take care of each other. We'll see you tomorrow.